Railroad engineers, what's the creepiest thing you've seen at work? Story 1. I have two stories. One, I work in the electric train department of Amtrak in the Northeast. One night, we had a report of wire theft in a remote location along the Harrisburg Run, and we were sent out to investigate. Typically, the work crew gets there before the police, so we'll usually hang back a bit until the men with guns get there in case the perpetrator is still there. We show up and see some wire hanging and some guy laying on the ground. We assume he hit a live wire, got fried, and is now dead. We walk up and shout to the guy, but we don't get a response. After about 10 minutes, the police show up and start taking pictures of the scene. One cop grabbed a stick and poked the dead guy a few times just to make sure. No movement, definitely dead. The cop with the camera takes a picture of the dead guy. When the flash goes off, the dead guy jumps up, screams the loudest scream I've ever heard, and takes off running. The cop with the stick starts chasing after him with the stick above his head, while his partner and our crew just stand there trying to figure out what the frick just happened. 2. I was on a standby crew at night during a storm with two other guys. I was put on a piece of equipment called a cat car while the other two guys decided to hang out in the truck. With the cat car running to keep it warm, I decided to lock up and take a nap. I locked both doors with padlocks on the inside so there was no way anyone could get in without me letting them in. A few hours later, I awoke to some heavy wind and decided to check with the other guys to see if our supervisor had called with any trouble. When I got to the door, the lock was missing, but I couldn't open the door. The same with the other door. I called the other guys to come help, and when they got there, they asked how I managed to lock the cat car from the outside. If you're not quite following that, the padlocks that were originally on the inside locking the only two doors into the equipment were now on the outside. The three of us couldn't figure out what happened, but it creeped me the frick out. I would want to say that, there is maybe some sneaky maintenance way to get into that car, and maybe one of your coworkers snuck in, got the locks, and put them on the outside as a prank, but you would think they would, own up to it. Otherwise, it's kind of a weird prank. Story 2. Automated rail track inspector here. I've worked on inspection vehicles all around the world and actually have not seen as much weird stuff as some people who have already commented. The weirdest for me was on a track in Philadelphia. I was riding with the TME on the rear deck. He was a really cool guy and was pointing out all the landmarks next to the track. Mostly there were Rocky references, but I hadn't seen the film in ages and the locations were lost on me. We were driving up and down the same stretch of track all day near the Rockies gym, if I recall correctly. It was really run down and it looked like we were driving through a landfill site with all the city rubbish just poured down the embankment. On this trip, the TME was watching out and was uncharacteristically quiet. Out of nowhere, he shouts to the driver to sound the horn, and out of nowhere, all these cokeheads just appear. There were guys walking around spaced out, women with their boobs out, needles hanging out of arms, that type of scene. That sight really messed with my head. It was the lowest form of humanity. I asked the guy, what the F? He said that around this time each day, the dealer visits that area, so all the homeless guys living in that crap get their high. Women and men will do anything to get their hands on that crap. They sound the horn so that they can see the people who usually get up and start walking about. If they didn't, they worry that a high hobo will just walk out in front of them. Now, here's the weird crap. We entered a tunnel, and at the other end, the land was cleared out, and there are allotments up the embankment. For 500 meters past the tunnel, the land is all clean and organized and marked out with crops and plants growing. There are guys standing watching us pass holding pitchforks and other gardening equipment. The TME explained that these were pensioners from the same project. They cleaned up the land and used it to grow crops and food. They were standing by the tunnel to guard from the cokeheads on the other side. Best and worst of humanity separated by a tunnel. Story 3. A large part of my family works for the railroad, and here is what I've heard. Not all creepy, but scary. 1. My dad, who is a no-nonsense 6'6" man, came home one night after a derailment and was white as a sheet. He told my mom he met a man walking away from the derailment, which was in the middle of the woods. He didn't think it was too weird because some people check out wrecks and derailments. Anyway, my dad gets to the derailment and says hey to my uncle. The cause of the derailment was a truck that had been hit and then pushed by the engine. Now, none of this is weird until my dad sees the man in the truck. It looks like a beat-up version of the man he met on the way to the derailment. He got the man's driver's license when the sheriff's deputy showed up. The way my uncle put it was, your dad almost passed out and had to sit down. He didn't say why, because you don't do that around railroad men. 2. My uncle was walking the rails, which you do to prevent derailment and such, and he had to pee. So he went into some woods. He said he walked up onto what he was sure was some kind of animal sacrifice weird crap. He called the other workers to see it, and they were very creeped out. They just left and tried to make a joke of it. 3. The number of drunk hobo/homeless people who pass out on the rails is oddly high. 4. A hobo was found dead in a hopper car, the kind that are open and typically hold grain. They figured since it was the summer he wanted more air circulation and hopped in that one. Well, the car was filled and no one really looked in it. It wasn't figured out until the car was unloaded. To take a break from the tragic parts of that story, I have to say I really want a shirt that says, "You don't do that around railroad men." And when people ask me, "What don't you do?" I'll just say, "I'll never tell." Story 4. I worked in a rail yard. Not out on the rails themselves as an engineer conductor, but we saw a few interesting things. My buddy saw what he thought was a black garbage bag laying inside the well of an intermodal car. We have to remove any debris as the shipping containers won't fit in properly. He reached in to grab it and quickly pulled it up, only to discover it was a dead vulture. Feathers fell off and he dropped it and began screaming and running down the tracks. I was hysterical. I told him he still had to get it because it was on his side of the train. Best story though was working the overnight shift. Train came in and was parked. A few hours later, I see a disheveled man walking around looking lost. I had heard stories that we occasionally still get hobos riding the rails. And this gentleman was my first. Official railroad policy is to call the cops and have them arrested for trespassing, but the unwritten rule was if it appeared they were not trying to steal or vandalize anything, to just escort them off property. I asked the guy if he's looking for the exit, and he said he was. I pointed it out to him, and he thanked me. He turns and said, "Hey man, where the heck am I? I've been riding the rails all day and fell asleep. I had to get the heck out of Baltimore." I looked at him and said, "Baltimore?" He looked confused. Apparently he got on the train at the rail yard across town, rode over to a classification yard, fell asleep, and woke up in our yard across town. 6 hours, and he had gone about 5 miles. He was peed. I was trying not to laugh as he was muttering to himself out the gate. Story 5. Working in a tunnel with 2 other colleagues one time, and we all heard a woman screaming down the tunnel, like in the films when a woman sees a dead body or a man with a gun, kind of loud, hysterical screaming. 2 of us start sprinting toward the noise, and after 5 to 10 minutes we realize there is nothing there at all, no noise or sign of people. We are so sure we heard screaming, we go to the next station supervisor who informs us there's absolutely no one working around that was close enough for us to hear. We were in the deep underground section, and we all heard that same noise that was creepy. I've heard a colleague speaking about walking alone in the tunnels, again away from all people close to him at night, and hear someone whispering, and another colleague hears chains at an abandoned station. I'm not a supernatural person, but I've no reason to doubt these guys' stories as they were told to me one-on-one. Very quiet when you're on your own underground, so it could be mind playing tricks, I guess, but still a creepy experience. Also, to lighten up the spookiness, there are a few women who actively flash train drivers from their houses that back onto the train lines. Never seen any of them, but been in a cab with different drivers talking about it happening. The whispering is probably easy enough to explain. Human brains are great at pattern matching/recognition. If there's enough low-level random background noise from echoes and such, our delicious brains will try to form it into something recognizable. Kind of like people saying Jesus and toast. So never worry your tasty brain in deserted tunnels about it. It's definitely not zombies. Well, I'm glad that someone else got to be the one to point out the trickery of the human brain that wasn't me. It is good that this logical and very trustworthy commenter is someone you should definitely let near your delicious brain. Story 6. Content warning. Self-termination. Scroll forward 1 minute 21 seconds to skip this story. I worked as a general laborer at the port over the summer helping move rail cars filled with grain. The cars in the port move pretty slowly compared to when they're out traveling the countryside, but that makes incidents that do happen all the more terrifying. The only incident I saw with my own eyes was a rat get pinched under a wheel and have its left side burst open and its entire insides popped out and land next to the tracks still in rat form. Other incidents at the port that I've been told by the regulars that have worked there for 50 years. Worker was walking to work one day, early morning shift, so it's still dark out, and tripped over something. Looked down and saw a severed human head just staring blankly up at him. Turns out some guy had committed self-termination by jumping off the overpass into the oncoming train, and parts of his body went everywhere. Another guy committed self-termination by laying a small red towel down over one of the rails and lying on his back face up with his neck over the track and arms crossed across his chest. Then he just waited for a train to come. They found him in the morning and he hadn't moved an inch. This is part of the track where the train goes pretty slowly. He definitely would have felt it for a split second at least. On a lighter note, there was apparently an infamous train tagger that would graffiti trains with comic strips so that you could watch the trains go by and read the comics. Story 7. I am a freight conductor. We hit a young lady walking between the two main tracks at like 5 in the morning. That sucks, and dead bodies are creepy on their own, but the craziest part was that I thought we hit two different people. The woman that I saw was white, heavy-set, and in her late 40s. She was walking toward the train, leaning out in front of us. When myself and the brakeman walked back to find the woman, what we found did not match what I saw. She did not go under the train, so she was mostly in one piece. We found a Latin woman who was very thin, and I later found out in her early 20s. Now, I thought I was crazy, but the brakeman started asking me if we had hit two people and described the woman in her 40s the same as I had seen her. Needless to say, we only hit one person. He and I were convinced that this young girl was possessed by some evil entity. The face I saw before we hit her still pops into my mind occasionally. It was evil, twisted, and full of pain. Story 8. I looked everywhere in my drive for the photo, but I can't find it. I was working at a BNSF railway in Stockton, California, maintaining the cranes that pull cars off the tracks when a freight engine rolled in with the front end a little caved in, covered in red. The entire front end was covered in what appeared to be red, bloody chunks, a paste left over from rolling through maybe a herd of cattle or a horde of zombies. I didn't know what to think. I felt my stomach churn, and my coworker turned green and heaved a bit. I asked the foreman what happened. He told me some teenager jumped out in front of it. Later, I grew a pair and walked up to it as these folks were cleaning it without any signs of being affected by the sight. Turns out, the train hit a stalled fiberglass trailer filled with tomatoes that was headed to the Hunt's Cannery in Oakdale. Bad joke on the foreman's part to say it was a teenager, but holy crap, that would be horrific until you knew what it actually was. Story 9. Somewhat relevant. I am a station attendant and have a few stories. Found a dead kangaroo on the train, so I had to lock off the carriage to the train. Had to stop a transgender lady from being on the tracks who was attempting to commit self-termination. I think it was a bad breakup. Trains were canceled so she wouldn't be hit. Managed to calm her down and convinced her to get up and call a friend to meet her. Had to stand in the way of a deranged woman who threatened to jump in front of a train until the police arrived. Had a homeless person steal an artificial plant after I stopped him from breaking into one of the train station shops. A lady's handbag managed to pull an escalator step out. She wanted her handbag damages to be paid by the rail company. We said only if she paid for the repairs of the escalator. Lots of fricking and adult toys in strange places. Story 10. Friend of the family is now retired railroad man. He was in a caboose during World War II on an ammunition train when it exploded, and he somehow got out alive. Another time, very close to the same place of the explosion, they had to stop the train one night. Engineer called back saying they were going to be there a while so he could get off and stretch his legs. He did just that and stepped off a bridge and fell about 20 feet and broke a leg. I was a volunteer fireman. One 10 below zero day, we were called to a body on the tracks. I expected a body in 5 or more pieces. He was rolled up in a ball instead. He had been there all night wondering how long it took to thaw him out. Second body on track, he was in at least 5 pieces. Though it was an accident, a letter was found in his home saying he was going to kill himself. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.